Thank you everybody for coming. This is the Women in STEM panel. I decided to hold this panel for Women's History Month because women make up only 24% of the STEM workforce, and 50% of those women leave STEM in the first 10 years of working in STEM. So it's really important for us to hear about the experiences of women, how we can better support each other, how our male colleagues can also support us. So I'm very, very excited to hear from this really distinguished group of women. So they're all taking time out of their day to come here and talk to you. We're going to start by each of them introducing themselves, telling us a little bit about the work that they do.
I'm Shania. I am a director of product at a company called Cloudflare. It's a privacy and security company. Before that, I was at Google for about 4 years and eBay. And before that, I started a digital marketing agency that I sold. But I actually started my career as an analyst. So I'm really happy to be here. I try to make sure that people understand like the technology system and how we're bettering people's lives. So I'm really excited to be here. Oh, sure. So I actually started, and I got a business bachelor's degree, and I actually went back to school after working in the tech industry for about 5 years to get a computer science degree while I was working full time. So don't advise do that. Finish now.
Hey everybody, my name is Ayori Selassie. I am the founder of a company startup called Selfpreneur, where we launch products to enable people to learn about artificial intelligence and improve their lifestyles. I'm also a product marketer for AI products at Salesforce, the big Salesforce tower over there, work in that building. And I've been an engineer for 20 years. I actually started my career when I was about 16 with the first African-American owned technology store in Oakland, California. It's right off of MLK in North Oakland, if anybody's familiar with that area. And I'm born and raised in Oakland, and my educational background is quite non-traditional. I was actually homeschooled up until I was 18 years old, so I taught myself like throughout my entire high school era. And then I got a GED, and I came to Laney College, and so I used to actually sit in here and take classes. I was a computer lab tech, so I worked in Hall F and over in Hall G, and I was also a computer science lab teacher's aide at the same time. And I got an associate's arts degree, and I stopped there, but there's a story behind that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I just want to say it's an honor to be on a panel with two ladies who are entrepreneurs starting their own businesses. That's wonderful. My name is Marissa Danzy. I am an engineering manager at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan. It's a pretty big hospital over on the Upper East Side. I oversee the off-sites for the hospital, so I have about 20 buildings where I manage the facilities operations, the day-to-day operations. That's anything mechanical, electrical, plumbing, small construction jobs, carpentry, everything in the physical plant for about 20 facilities. My educational background, for my undergrad, I went to SUNY Maritime College, which is in the Bronx in New York City. There I studied both marine and mechanical engineering, so I got a dual degree in both, and I also got my U.S. Coast Guard Third Assistant Engineer's license, so I studied with the Merchant Marine as well. And I went back to school a couple of years ago, and I just got my MBA from Syracuse University in supply chain and finance.
I feel like the underachiever of the panel. Hi, can you hear me? My name is Stacy Lewis. I am a researcher at Stanford University looking at policy, bringing ocean science research into policy decision-making processes. Oh, well maybe I don't need a microphone if it's not on already. Maybe I'm going to be really loud now. Camera too. So I actually just finished my PhD at Stanford about 3 months ago. Actually, not
I had kind of an untraditional path to academia. I came to Stanford after about 8 years working in ocean policy and ocean science in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, I spent time in Barbados and in the Caribbean doing both research and policy. I really got into marine biology in my undergraduate degree. And I saw some interesting things now that I'm a scientist working in the Western Pacific on how small island nations are dealing with climate change, and bringing to bear some of my policy work in DC on how they can come up with governance processes and solutions to some of their bigger drivers for marine systems and coastal systems.
So thank you all for introducing yourselves. You all work on such different fields, so I wanted us to kind of go through and for you to tell us about a project that you've worked on that you're maybe the most excited about, or one of the coolest things. So we have a lot of, engineering nerds in here, so we want to nerd out with you a little bit.
So I kind of have two answers to that question. One is the one that I think engineering-wise is the coolest, but the one that is a different project that I'm actually the most proud of. So when I was at eBay, there are a lot of consumer to consumers, like I want to sell you my television, or big businesses, small businesses that actually sell and have large distribution areas. We didn't have a way to personalize and make a recommendation engine for if I wanted to sell you my television, because all of the data is so skewed, and there are no training algorithms at all. So I created a whole machine learning pipeline to make a personalization engine for eBay, and I knew nothing about machine learning at the time. I did teach myself machine learning, and it was great, successful, blah, blah, blah. But the thing that I'm most proud of is at Google, one of the big metrics for Google is teaching developers how to use Google's products and integrating it into the apps that they create or the websites that they create. And at the time when I was there, Android sucked compared to iOS. And so one of the metrics was we need to teach more people how to create Android apps. And so we don't have enough people to teach Android. And so I created a program that's still active today called Android Basics in partnership with Udacity to teach people who don't know how to program at all whatsoever how to build Android applications from scratch. And so 4 years later, I see doctors and I see teachers and therapists who've taken my course and have created apps that go beyond my wildest dreams, from what people have taken things and how they've been able to achieve it by the courses that we've been able to create. So if you see it, you go to udacity.com/Google, and there's a dog, Tommy. That's my dog.
That's super cool. Like, if you haven't taken our course, you probably should. I really I like to do a lot of things outside of the assigned work that I get from the companies that I work for, and somehow they don't fire me. So has anyone ever been to a hackathon before? Raise your hand if you've been to a hackathon. All right, cool, a couple of people. So by the time you graduate from here, you should all have gone to a hackathon and participated, because they're amazing. But basically what they are is, they're these big competitive events where people get together and they're usually issued some sort of challenge, such as, build an Android app, or build apps to solve problems in education, or solve a problem for the government or something like that. And so I really loved doing hackathons, and so I used to attend them all the time until I decided I wanted to host one, I wanted to organize one. So I actually organized the first Startup Weekend Hackathon in Oakland, and we actually had a really unique theme. We focused on helping young kids get involved in coding to basically build applications to solve problems in their community. And specifically, we focused on young men of color, so African American men, and we called it the Black Male Achievement Hackathon. And this was absolutely one of the most wonderful, joyous programs that I've ever worked on in my life. And I still know a lot of young kids who came through there, and they've gone on to study computer science, and some of them have already graduated. And I actually had a chance to talk with a young girl who came there. Her mom dragged her to this hackathon, and she was like, coding is stupid, engineering is stupid, and math is dumb. And she wanted to lead the hackathon. And so I sat down with her and I was like, what's going on? Like, what would you be doing this weekend if you weren't at this hackathon? And she said she'd be at the mall. And I was like, well, what would you be doing at the mall? She like, just window shopping. I was like, wouldn't it be awesome if you could just like run your own clothing store, like through Instagram? And she was like, yeah. So I was like, you should bring your friends this weekend and y'all should build something cool, way better than the mall experience. She actually won the hackathon with the team that she built together. She actually brought her friends back the next day. And I don't know if anyone has heard of the conference South by Southwest. It's a huge conference. It's like, definitely check it out. You can find all sorts of cool videos online. Like Barack Obama has spoken there. The CTO, Megan Smith of the United States, has spoken there. This young girl spoke at South by Southwest just this year. And I was just so proud of her to be able to see her up there. And so working on these hackathons have been obviously volunteer time, but I've loved it. And the side thing that came from that initial project is later on, Prince reached out to us and asked us to run a hackathon for him, which we did in New Orleans. It was the first ever hackathon and a music event at the Essence Festival. And the theme was, could an app have saved Trayvon Martin? And it was a really touching experience for me because Trayvon Martin's parents actually showed up. And, they're, again, incredible stories and apps and ideas that came out of that experience from just young kids who hadn't thought about coding, hadn't thought about engineering before, but got exposed to it and had the right mentors, like folks like these ladies on this panel and others, and support from companies like Google and Facebook and Salesforce. And it was really just an example of, what can happen and how people can be inspired when folks come together.
So I would like to give an example of something that's great from what I do, but I don't think it's as interesting as it may sound. So I think I think a better example would be something exciting from my training, and that is when I went to SUNY Maritime College, I worked on a steamship, and when we're on the steamship, the students get to, you learn, you touch, you work on everything, but it's also part of a leadership program. And part of that leadership program, you're put in charge of work and watch parties, and you're responsible for safety on the ship. So I think that one of the things that I really enjoyed the most was when we went to firefighting school, because when you're on the ship, you are the fire team. If there's a fire, you have to go don the gear and go tend to that fire. And they taught us all about how to fight fires. I've been in them and don the gear, and it's hot. But also fun. But I think that the leadership that I got from doing that early on when I was 18, 19 years old it was a lot of useful tools that I still use today. And so I really think that was probably the most exciting thing for me.
So I think because I spent so much time in Washington, D.C., I have an exciting story from that time period that actually pivoted me towards going back to science after spending several years in between degrees trying to figure out what I wanted to do and how best to help people problem solve. And living on the coast of Alabama growing up, we didn't have a lot of access to a lot of resources, but it really gave me a passion for how people connect to their environment and how we become disconnected. And I had a passion for science and for connecting people back to where they live. And that brought me, during my time at Salem College, to Barbados, like I said before. But I'm jumping ahead because what I want to tell you about is two different experiences. The first is what I did in DC, which pivoted me towards spending time in small island developing nations trying to help and co-develop climate change strategies. So when I was in DC, the first thing that I started doing is trying to get into working in politics and working in bringing science to policy. And I eventually, after I think 54 applications, applications, 10 of which the same very small nonprofit doing oceans, I finally got an internship, which eventually led to me being in the high levels of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, at the tail end of the George Bush administration. And if many of you know, that's during the era of ClimateGate, when climate scientists clashed with the Bush administration. But then we transitioned to the Obama administration. And the actual sitting in the federal level and seeing the process of a transition, and the lack thereof just recently, and the fact that there's agencies that spend years upon years getting ready for this, was in itself a really great experience. But because I was at the right place at the right time, I wasn't a federal employee. I was a fellow, just put in this high-level position. So I didn't really have a connection to the previous administration, and I wasn't a federal employee. So I was an outside person that the Obama administration could use to liaison with the national agency. So I became the NOAA liaison to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and my job was to make sure that they had access to everything about the organization and the agency and the stakeholders. So just getting the people in the right place at the right time, which eventually led, if you remember, there was a huge stimulus package, which included a lot of restoration work. Point being that I saw this process, although I was just connecting the dots, about how science can feed into policy at the federal level and why it's really important and ways that we can stay engaged. So that was amazing to be that close up to the Obama administration, to see that transition, to be involved with the high levels of deciding about climate change policy for the next 4 years. Then I moved on to representing ocean science organizations as kind of a lobbyist for science, making sure there was federal investment in some of our science infrastructure that allows us to predict weather, storm surges, sea level rise, some of the biggest coastal and natural disasters this country and the world's going to see because of climate change. That was really rewarding work, but I felt like I wasn't connecting people back to their environment. Like I was helping redirect millions of dollars into making sure we had ocean observations. But I really wanted to get back to working with people. And so I had not really thought about doing a PhD, and this, the board chair said, hey, you should think about this place at Stanford. I'm first generation to go to college on both sides of my family. I remember typing my college applications to the highest schools in the country. So going to Stanford, I was like, I don't know, this is not really what I want to do, but I need to do something different. I needed to connect. And the interdisciplinary program at Stanford is amazing because I had about 10 years of experience in policy and science. I was able to choose what I wanted to do. And that was great, and I was fully funded by that. And so what I set out to do is to find a community that I could help, and we could co-design some research and some products. So the first summer I set out, it was a 6-year endeavor that just ended. I set out to a couple places, including Hawaii, and landed in Palau. The Republic of Palau is in the Western Pacific, east of the Philippines and north of Papua New Guinea. I didn't know really what I wanted to do, but I just sat and had time and went to communities and really just work with people to figure out what I could do for the next 5 years. And it just fit, and I ended up working in communities on sedimentation and using corals as records of climate change and environmental drivers. So I've worked really closely at the highest levels with Palauans, but also looking at the customary system and helping drive community-based decision-making. And now I'm in a postdoctoral position that we are working with the president and regional leaders to protect large areas, the protected areas. And that includes in Palau, they're protecting 80% of their EEZ, which is a massive percentage of the world. And it's really a blue nation because it's really the landmass of San Jose and has 17,000 people, but a huge EEZ. So those are my 2 experiences that I really touched me and made me who I am today.
Great, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing those experiences. I love how different they all were. An experience that maybe all of us have experienced is having people kind of doubt our abilities. So Harvard Business Review reported that women in STEM fields reported having to provide more evidence of their qualifications. So I was wondering if you could maybe share an experience where people have doubted your abilities, either because of your gender or also your race. And I would be interested to hear about that.
You were saying that I could not contain myself from laughing at it, because it's absolutely true. But the way that, actually to answer your question, every single job that I applied to, every single job that I've ever worked, has always doubted my abilities in one way, shape, or form. And that doesn't mean that I can't move forward. It doesn't mean that I can't have career growth. It doesn't mean that I can't advocate for myself. There are just additional skills and credentials that, as sucky as it is, you might just have to get, because there aren't. It also sets you apart when you do have those credentials. So I started a company, and I can tell you a story from every single job, but I'll tell you this one at Google. I loved Google, working there so much. It was my dream company. It was a fluke that I got in, which is actually not true. I stalked a recruiter. I quite literally stalked a recruiter. And I was like, I used to have a small time in staffing where I used to work there. I'm like, so if they have a Google job, they have a ton of Google jobs, right? So I'm gonna be friends with you. And then, long story short, I ended up getting a contract position, and once I got there, I was like, I'm never leaving. So I'm gonna have to do whatever I need to do to stay here. And then, 3 or 4 years into it, I was like, oh, my title is program manager, but I'm actually a product manager. And even though it's only a 1-letter difference, it's a huge difference. Product managers are responsible for the vision. They're responsible for interfacing with the customers. They're responsible for the money. The product managers tell the engineers what to build and how to build it and what the customer needs. The product manager is the voice of the customer. Engineers take that vision and actually just build it to the product manager's specifications. And I was like, this is what I'm doing. But I'm getting paid as a program manager, which is basically to track time, schedules, and budgets. Not the same. But everyone was like, well, you can't be a product manager. You don't have a CS degree. Or you can't be a product manager, you're not technical enough. Or you can't be a product manager because whatever reason they gave me. And so I was like, well, I could be a product manager at another company if I don't have a computer science degree, because there are companies out there that you can be a product manager without having technical skills. There are far fewer of them, and there are more people competing for them. Or I could go to a boot camp, or I could, get more technical skills. But I knew even if I went to a boot camp, that wasn't going to be enough, because the same insight or the same thoughts that Google was going to send me, every other company in Silicon Valley was also going to say, you don't have a computer science degree, you don't have a technical ability, just from that one checkbox. So I went back to school. I took about a year and a half because you have one bachelor's degree, you can actually get a second bachelor's degree. You don't have to do the whole 4 years over again. So it only took me a year and a half to get a second bachelor's degree. And then I left. Google paid for it, some of it, and then I left. And I have been a product manager ever since. And I've also doubled my income ever since. Because sometimes you have opposition, but you can get over that. And the more education, the thing that you guys are doing right now, sitting in these seats, is what you need to move forward. And what will set you apart, even if someone tells you that you can't, are the check boxes, the credentials, any way that you can get it. Invest in yourself, and that data that you have will be able to knock all that stuff down.
Nailed it. Great advice. Great story too. I don't know. It's just it's kind of a regular thing. I mean, I'm sure all of you like who are technical or who've done something, you know, who are in a field, like you probably all get doubted by somebody. Like even if you're a guy, like you probably have people being like, bro, you don't know what you're talking about, right? Like, so like everyone experiences that, right? This like doubt from other people. But I have to say, like, as a woman and a woman of color and a woman of color who looks half my age, I've just experienced it all throughout my life. Like, you know, when I was doing computer engineering and networking engineering, you know, somebody would walk into the office and they'd be like, little girl, you know, why are you working, playing with this computer, and where is your father? And I'd be like, I am the engineer working on rebuilding your network. Here's my card. And like, they wouldn't believe me. Like, it's not even like they were like, oh, my bad. It'd be like, let me go check this out. And like, I've had people like in conferences, like literally like not believe my business cards. I've applied for housing right here in the Bay Area, and people have doubted my paycheck stubs, and they have rejected housing for me. So like the kind of discrimination that you can experience, I think as a person of color, and I really want to talk about intersectionality. Raise your hand if you've heard of intersectionality before. This is such an important lesson for Women's History Month. Intersectionality, thank you for the snaps. Intersectionality is when you are the member of multiple different groups who experience marginalization. So me being a woman of color, and a person who comes from a family who was poor, right? I'm sure many people in this room can identify with that as well. That created a lot of different intersecting areas of doubt that would come from people. And I think the one experience that, like, I just, like, really ticked me off is I was a product manager, similar to you, I was a product manager, and I was working for an HR department, right? You would think that HR people are, like, the smartest people, and, like, they don't discriminate, and, like, they don't do microaggressions and things like that. But I was actually building an entire HR information system for this group, and one of the directors walked into the kitchen, and she assumed that that I was the like kitchen cleaning person, and she said, "Oh, like, are you new here? Are you cleaning the kitchen?" And I'm like, "No, I'm the product manager. I'm rebuilding your entire security system for HR." And she turned so beet red, and this was a woman. So this is also a person who experienced, I'm sure, a fair amount of discrimination, and they were, you know, a professional in HR. So, you know, it's really, it can happen a lot. And I think we all have to do a lot of work. Even myself, no matter how many intersections you experience, you're in, we all have to work on our biases. Like, you know, we shouldn't be making assumptions just because someone has bright lipstick and they wear high heels that they're not a data scientist. Like, that could be the most kick-ass data scientist you've ever met. So, like, you know, we just all have to check our biases at the door.
I think an example for me that happens far too often is typically I'm the only woman in the room. I'm the youngest person in the room, and I'm usually the person who's in charge of the room. But for the people that don't know that I'm in charge, they'll typically direct all their conversation, all of their questions, all of their points to someone else on my team, and they won't acknowledge me until I typically have an advocate in the room. I worked with a gentleman who just retired, actually, so twice my age, my mom's age, and you know, we worked together for about 5 years, and he would always introduce me to everyone as his partner because we worked together. We're in the exact same position. He has 40 years experience and I have 10. And we would be in project meetings where it was my project, and they'd be, you know, talking to him and thinking that they were just smooching him over and just really making a good impression. And then he'd be like, maybe you should ask her because she's the one who's in charge. Like, I'm not the one making the decision or signing the contract. It's going to be her. And so I would say what I've learned from this, especially being the woman in the room, it's always good to have an advocate or have that person, you know, that knows your skill set and is talented. And even when you're the only other woman in the room, if that woman says something, validate it. Oh yeah, what she said, that was a really great idea. Or as so-and-so said. Because I think that really helps kind of move forward past that issue and help your words be heard. I don't like to get too aggressive, but you know, I'm a little passive when it comes to that. But when it's time to make the decision, it's like, okay, yeah, we're not doing that, and then everyone's just kind of like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, we're not doing that. You got to come, you know, with something better. But that's my experience with it.
So I think I can bring a lens of working in academia, which we tend to call kind of the older scientists that have, you know, had access to going straight through and access to more research funding. We call them graybeards because they're the old white guys that think that they have privilege. They do have privilege and they have power, and they squeeze. You know, I felt it as a female working in all-male labs, but also working in policy. Women weren't taken very seriously, especially as scientists. And we noticed in the science community, we would sit around with all the dean directors of the institutions, and they were all old white men, and not very many women. And the only scientist on the board that was a woman mentioned this point, and it goes back to some of the questions we might talk about later. But we realized that the problem is majority of marine scientists and people doing ocean science are female that are graduating with PhDs right now, but we're not retaining them in the sciences, and it has a lot to do with the support and the way the system is structured that really has an advantage for male professors, and there's not a lot of family care and healthcare benefits and things that would allow people and single mothers and single parents really to actually succeed in really academic fields.
So thank you so much, and I really appreciate you all sharing stories that might be a little bit more personal, and I'm sure the students are benefiting. I have plenty of more questions, but I really wanted to open it up and see if anybody in the audience has questions. I have a microphone that I can bring up to you if anybody wants to ask our panelists some questions.
In the case where you've been in charge and no one else acknowledges that, or even, let's say, is aware of that, what would your suggestion be in that situation for those who are not?
Well, I typically get them to redirect their question. So if he's saying, you know, she's the one who's in charge, if you don't have someone doing that, you say, hey, you know, this is my project, I'm the one, you gotta validate yourself. You know, I'll be the one making the decision on this, so I'm gonna need you to clarify that for me. These are my questions, and until they have expressed, you know, the things that you're interested in, give you the answers that you want to hear, then you make that decision. But that's from a project management standpoint, because that's typically what I'm working on.
I just wondering, what are some of the self-care things or ways that you take care of yourself in order to help you continue moving forward in your career despite some of the setbacks?
Is that for me, or is that for the? Oh, I think I'll answer first. So I've always been very physically active. When I was in college, I was on 3 varsity teams. I never got any sleep. It was either studying or I was in the gym. And for me, I'm really competitive, but it's also an opportunity for me to let out some of that frustration and stress from being misunderstood and discounted on a daily basis. And I like to get massages, and I run, and I just do a lot of things that are good for stress relief, because I do have to make a lot of decisions on a daily basis. And people are always questioning, are you the one that I should be talking to? Yes, I'm the one that you're calling. I'm the one making the decision. And it happens more times than I can count where I have to say, yeah, I'm the manager. I'm the person that's in charge. I've been working here 5 years at my company now, and some people don't know that I'm the person that's in charge. They have to be reminded daily. So.
I wanted to answer the first question also, and I'll answer your question about if you're in charge. I lead a lot of teams, and if you're, I look 12. I had to cut my hair. I've done a whole bunch of stuff to make myself look older over the years, but it's also a confidence thing, right? Like, there are a lot of women in the room that are still struggling, like they haven't gotten to this place yet, where we can say, yes, hey, I'm in charge. Like, really, I really am. And I think the more confident you are in yourself, the more you have whatever you need to walk into a room and own it without fear of being labeled aggressive, or like we like to call passionate, right? That will help, because that confidence breeds appreciation in the room. People want you to lead, they want your opinion, because they don't have it. And you have to have the ability to speak up and advocate for yourself. But that requires the second question of self-care, right? If you can't get to a place of, I am enough, I don't care what all the industry is saying, I know that I'm enough, I know that I'm good at my job, I know that I can move forward, and whatever way you need a stress relief. I run, my sister's in the audience, is a track star, but I run very, very, very slowly. And I dance, I used to dance a lot, but also I do really easy and accessible things like binge on Netflix on the weekends. Like, we're all normal people, and doing whatever you need to do to feel like you are enough, regardless of where you came from, regardless of what you look like, you are enough.
I'll just add, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and so self-care is super important for me, because not only for myself, but also, I have to model these behaviors for her. And if there are any parents in the room, especially like of older kids, then you probably know, like, people today are like super anxious, right? Like, people are like very depressed, very anxious, very stressed out, highly distracted, like all the time. And so I feel like for me, the number one things that I have to do to manage my self-care is make sure like that I'm able to focus. And so my cell phone doesn't ring, it doesn't buzz, it doesn't vibrate, and it doesn't, like, apps don't send notifications to my phone. My smartphone is effectively a dumb phone, except for my daughter. If my daughter texts me or calls, her stuff comes through. Because I just like, I don't need all that. Like, I don't need to be accessible like 24 hours a day. Like, I still use Instagram, I still use Twitter, but I use it and then I'm gone, right? And I have found that has been like the most effective thing for me to be able to focus and like connect with people and have really strong, healthy relationships. And my mom is 72 years old, and so I take care of my mom. My mom lives with me, and so spending time with her and making sure that I'm just doing regular things like taking her grocery shopping and like hearing from her like all the different crazy conversations she has with the grandkids. Like, those are things that they just slow you down. You have to slow down to be with other people in that way, in a quality way. And I think that's one of my personal self-care things. And the other thing that I do is I take sabbaticals, and I know not every industry, not every career lets you do that sort of thing, which is one reason why I highly, highly advocate for people going into technology, because it's a place where it is accepted that you need to take care of your brain. You need to take time off, like take off for a month, take off for 2 months, take off for 3 months, and let yourself fully recharge. Because if you're doing highly creative, highly detailed, oriented, technical work, and you're building like the AI that's gonna like transform the world, like you need to be 100% when you're working on that stuff. So don't overwork yourself, give yourself as much time as you need, and we didn't get these benefits from sitting on our butt, we fought for these benefits, So sometimes you're also gonna have to get up and fight and say, hey corporation, you're doing it wrong, let me tell you how to do it right.
Just add really quickly, just to a point about, I haven't really led a lot of teams, but I think part of being a good team member and being a good person and trying to drive forward your work is not only being a good leader, but also being a good team member and realizing that a lot of this work is collaborative across many different disciplines, technology. When we're problem solving, when we're coming up with solutions, it's about being able to be working across the team, and that requires confidence within yourself, because if you're not confident you're working on a team, you're going to doubt everyone and you're going to be a lot more aggressive and not be a good team member. So I think it's across all, we've all said this, believe in yourself and be confident, because if you're really doing something and you're doing something cutting edge, people are going to resist you, no matter what your background, no matter what you look like, you know, they're going to resist you, and there's going to be a little tension when you're kind of breaking these new grounds. So just having confidence in yourself. And then as far as self-care, you know, all the things, exercise, but for me, it's been really important to build community in the experience that I'm having. So I took a lot of time in between my degrees, and while I was in the degree, I really spent time and focus. So credentials are really, really important, right? Now I, fresh off of having a PhD, have access to things I wouldn't have had otherwise. But it's the process of getting my bachelor's degree and kind of forging a road in my family doing that, and then my master's degree. But spending time between that, working as a research assistant and an intern in places where, you know, I don't have paychecks, but I'm actually learning a lot about myself and the field and the places that I want to work in. So I think in that way I was building community because I was taking time. And then one of the questions you prepped us with was, what will we tell our younger self? And I would say be present in everything that you're doing, because that builds your character and what you're doing and your connection to what you're involved with. And if you try to build community and learn from each other in this room, that's the best education.
You all touched on facing doubt in work and in your experiences in STEM. And maybe recently when I'm not studying or reading or who knows what thinking, I don't know. I spend a lot of time at UC Berkeley on our rocketry team. We work with solid rockets, we're planning to work with liquid propulsion systems, and I find that really exciting, and I'm dedicating a lot of time to it. And even despite my effort and contributions to the team, I also have faced a lot of doubt. Oftentimes I find that I'm the only girl in the room, in a room full of guys talking about rockets, trying to give input. And I've gotten comments along the lines of, well, how many girls would be willing to stay up all night to design a rocket? Or how often do you get very passionate about a project? And you all gave really good input on being confident, having those qualifications that make you stand out. But even despite all of those setbacks, for me, I find that seeing younger generations get excited about STEM is, I guess, one of the most enjoyable experiences for me, as I'm currently facing discrimination in STEM as a woman of color. So my question for you all is, how can we inspire the next generation of engineers, scientists, mathematicians to kind of break the stigma of women in STEM?
I think you need to be the leader you expect to see, which means that you need to try to embody what it is that you want, that you would have wished someone would have given to you, the example that they would go to the opportunity, or just, you know, when you see a younger woman coming up in the field, extend that hand and just say, hey, you know, do you have any questions about, you know, what you're going into, or any questions I can answer? If you're interested in getting into something, you know, maybe I can contact someone. I like to, I stay involved at both my alma maters. I'm an alumni ambassador to both of them. I'll be going to accepted students day at one college, and it's also part of the reason that I came here is because I'm really a proponent of just talking to the younger generation and then just making them aware at a younger age of some of the issues that are going on in the industry today that I just did not know about when I was coming up in the industry. You know, and when you're in that room, you're probably thinking in your head like, oh, what an asshole, or like,
oh, why do they have to say that? You know, and I think that sometimes you need to think out loud and just tell somebody what kind of asshole they're being. Like, all right, dude, was that really necessary? We're clearly all here doing the same thing. Like, you can take my input or don't take it, but it'll probably be a better project with it. You have to try it. You know what I mean? And you'll see that sometimes people just kind of do a complete 180. Sometimes they don't realize the benefit that you're bringing to the team, and you just gotta remind them.
So I want to add on to that. Everything that you said was really great. The first thing to kind of add is you need to stay. Don't opt out. But I think there's a lot of feelings around diversity in tech right now from both sides of the fence. And it's this us versus them kind of conversation that we should not be having. And I think as a proponent of diversity in tech, I do talks and blog posts and all kinds of stuff. There needs to be a way to tell those feelings and say that what you just said, actually, it makes me feel this way. And I know that sounds really therapy and really weird to say about your feelings, because that's also a stigma. But the other person needs to know that they're able to make a mistake, that they're able to they may make a comment that have no idea that actually hurt you. And they're going to keep saying it unless you have the language to actually communicate. I highly recommend that you read Feminist Fight Club, which is an awesome book by a New York Times reporter that basically gives you all the language that you could possibly need in a conversation. I recommend that you read Crucial Conversations, which is a book that has touched my heart dearly. And the third is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And if you don't like reading, she's having a Netflix special come out next month. Audible, yep. Audible is also great, right? So like having the language to be able to articulate what is, because you need to stay, right? And the problem is that engineers are inherently data-driven, right? There's processes and systems, and there's a right way and a wrong way. You can use all of these building blocks to create all kinds of stuff, but there are like fundamental things. When you get into tech, it's not data-driven, right? If there's only one person in the room, that can be counted off as a fluke, right? Or that's just like an outlier, right? So you need to stay to have two people in the room to kind of keep that conversation going, that what I just said is not a fluke. And if all the women leave, or if all the people of color leave, it's still gonna stay exactly the same. We need to be, and also the male allies in the room could also be a proponent of this, but you also need the language to be able to articulate that what you heard was incorrect, or this other person, and you have the confidence to be able to speak on it. All those things come into play. There's a lot of issues, but I say stay, find the language, and actually say the things out loud, even though it's uncomfortable.
Okay.
What's your favorite thing about being a woman in STEM?
I love creating. I love it. I have ideas coming out of my eyeballs, and all I wanted to do is create those things. But also, I like being able to feel like I have an impact in the world. There aren't a lot of people that, if you think about our world as a whole, there aren't a lot of people that can say, I had an idea and I created it and there it is and I can point to it. And not only that, but here are 10 million people using it. So the job that I did with Cloudflare, yes, it's a privacy and security company, but we handle 10% of the internet's traffic, of all of the internet. And so our mission, I joined this company because I now have the ability to do something mission-driven, is literally to build a better internet. I can't think of a bigger mission than literally building a better internet, protecting it, securing it. And if if I decided that I just wanted to go make a bunch of money, I could do that too. But that's my that's my option now, and that's my options are my favorite thing about technology. I could change the world if I want, but I can also sit in a penthouse if I want, right? Like, I have that. It's my choice and nobody else, but also I can do good in the world at the same time.
Yeah, I would add the same thing. I think my experiences as a woman, being a young mother, I actually had my daughter right when I graduated from Laney College, and you know, those things have had such a huge impact on the way I think about technology and the way I think about our future. So working with artificial intelligence, you know, I was the person in our company who brought up the importance of being really frank and having really open discussions about AI bias. And that opened up a conversation for the entire company about the ethical use of technology overall. And you know, for me, that conversation was certainly inspired by my experience from my gender, and but also other things as well, like recognizing that there are billions of people on the planet who don't have access to the same technology that we have, yet they're still being impacted by the things that we create. And, you know, having been socialized, you know, women have a tendency to be socialized as more empathetic creatures. And so being socialized as a highly empathetic creature, you know, I think about those things. They make me feel uncomfortable, right? You know, you have to be able to look like pain in the eye, pain in the face, and recognize that you are a part of that pain. Like the stuff that I do, you know, whether it's in my career or whether I choose to recycle or compost or not, has an impact on our climate, right? I'm a part of that. And that, if you can do that, then you can ask yourself a really honest question of what can I do to offset the damage that I'm creating as a human being on this planet. And that's what we really have to do. And that conversation has to be an inspirational conversation, because if we do it alone and if we do it in our own head, then it won't have the scale effect that we need to save the planet, right, and to save humanity. So I think all those things come from like my gendered experiences.
I love that you used empathy, because I kind of want to roll that into what I was going to say. And that's, I guess my favorite thing about being an engineer overall is that I just get to solve problems on a daily basis. I need to be challenged with something. And I was studying business before I started engineering, and it just wasn't challenging enough. And I didn't want it to be easy. I wanted something where I was constantly having to solve a problem every day. And that's what I do. People call me with their problems, and sometimes I'm the last resort. So if no one else can fix it, they're relying on me to fix it. Even if it has nothing to do with engineering, I'm gonna figure it out. But in the same way, I feel like just because I'm a woman, I try to understand, to be empathetic about what people are doing in their day-to-day. And because I'm in healthcare, I really try to understand what the patient financial services person is doing, what the nurse is doing, what the doctor is doing, what the strategy and innovation person is doing. And if I understand their part of the business better, then I can serve them better. So I really try to build relationships every single day, every time someone confronts me with a problem, and try to understand what they do in their day-to-day and what are the different things they need to be working and functioning in their built environment so that they can do their job better. And just by building those relationships and then knowing that they can rely on Marissa because, oh, she understands, she knows what I need, she knows exactly how to fix it, and she knows what time to come, and she knows how many, how much. And because they know that I know that, I can get my work done better, because I'm going to be like, yeah, we're thinking on the same page. It's going to be Tuesday, this time. I got those guys. Don't worry. I remember that Timmy's a little too short and da-da-da-da. You know, like all these different little things that I try to remember about their space and that person, and really try to personalize the experience that I'm giving as a facilities operations person, because it is a customer service role. Everyone is my customer. And when I do that, I think it really yields the best results.
Empathy and being the fixer. I like how everyone calls you to fix things. I think those are really really important. I really don't have much more to add, but I think it's important to acknowledge. I know that I recently struggled going back to academia at 33, not really having a formal kind of high-level education. I did have a master's from George Mason, but I didn't come from an Ivy League school or a high university, so everyone doubted me. And they could, and it's one of those things where you have to own your confidence and take it forward and believe in yourself. So that's a recent struggle that I've had, and how I work through it is really realizing that I have the confidence and that I'm always going to face these type of challenges.